The wind howled like a banshee around the fire watch tower, rattling the old wooden structure and whining through the gaps in the aged timbers. I huddled deeper into my threadbare sleeping bag, pulling it up to my chin, but the chill still seeped in, bone-deep and relentless, a constant reminder of my isolation high above the North American wilderness. My name is Rick, and I'm officially an idiot. 3 weeks ago, I'd been slinging lukewarm lattes and enduring the passive-aggressive sighs of avocado toast enthusiasts at a hipster cafe in the city. Rent was bleeding me dry, my social life was flatter than day-old soda, and existential dread was my constant companion. So, when I saw the online ad, seeking solitary lookout, remote location, rustic accommodations, above-average pay, it seemed like a bizarre but possibly sane escape. Escape being the operative word. Rustic accommodations, it turned out, meant a rickety tower that swayed in the wind like a drunk sailor, perched atop a granite peak that looked like God's discarded kneecap. Remote location? Try light years from civilization. The nearest town, according to John, my boss, and only human contact outside the occasional distorted radio crackle, was a good 4-hour drive down a logging road so rutted it felt like driving over a field of landmines. Above average pay? Well, let's just say the pay was enough to convince a desperate soul to ignore the screaming red flags waving in the wind. John. He'd been my only in-person contact, dropping me off at the base of the mountain in a battered pickup truck that looked like it had seen more action in Vietnam than actual logging roads. He was a man of few words and even fewer smiles, with eyes that seemed to have seen too much and a voice like gravel rolling downhill. He'd given me a cursory rundown of the tower, the radio, the emergency procedures, which mostly consisted of stay put and pray, and a week's worth of freeze-dried food that tasted suspiciously like cardboard. Then, with a curt nod, he'd left, disappearing down the mountain road leaving me alone with the whispering wind and the oppressive silence of the forest. The first few days had been peaceful, in a terrifying sort of way. The vastness of the wilderness, the panoramic view from the tower that stretched out to a horizon blurred by mist-shrouded mountains, it was breathtaking. During the day, the forest floor was a carpet of emerald moss, broken by the dark trunks of ancient pines and the dappled sunlight filtering through the canopy. Squirrels chattered, birds called, and the wind rustled the leaves, a symphony of nature's sounds. I even started to feel a kind of tranquility. Stupid, naive tranquility. Night was a different beast altogether. As darkness fell, the forest transformed. The friendly daytime sounds morphed into something sinister. The wind became a mournful wail, the rustling leaves sounded like stealthy footsteps, and the silence itself felt heavy, pregnant with unseen things. Leaves sounded like stealthy footsteps, and the silence itself felt heavy, pregnant with unseen things. The tower creaked and groaned under the assault of the night wind, each sound amplified by the chilling emptiness surrounding me. My little battery-powered lantern cast weak circles of light, pushing back the encroaching darkness only slightly, highlighting the dust motes dancing in the air and the shadows clinging to the corners of the small cabin. It was on the third night that things started to get weird. I was making my usual hourly radio check-in with John. Tower 7, checking in, all clear. My voice sounded hollow in the cramped cabin, bouncing off the wooden walls. Static crackled for a moment, then John's voice, rough and distorted, came back. 7, copy. Anything to report? Nope, just the usual, wind, trees, existential dread. You know, the classics. I chuckled nervously, trying to inject some levity into the conversation, desperate for any human connection. John didn't chuckle. He rarely did. Keep your eyes peeled. 7. Anything unusual, you report it. Anything at all. His tone was heavier than usual, a weight in his voice I couldn't quite place. Unusual? Like what? Bigfoot playing the banjo? I tried again, but my joke fell flat. Just anything, John repeated, his voice losing its already tenuous connection, fading into static. Over. The radio went silent. I stared at the crackling speaker, a prickle of unease running down my spine. John wasn't usually this cryptic. Anything unusual? What did that even mean? That night, I started hearing things. Not the normal forest sounds. These were different. Faint, rhythmic drumming, deep in the woods. Too regular for animal paws, too structured for random woodland noises. At first, I dismissed it as the wind playing tricks on my ears, the isolation getting to me. But it persisted, a low, pulsing beat that resonated through the floor of the tower, vibrating in my bones. I spent the next day scouring the woods with my binoculars during my daytime rounds, searching for any sign of the drumming, any source of the strange sound. Nothing. Just trees, more trees, and the unnerving feeling of being watched from the shadows. By the time night fell, the unease had curdled into a knot of fear in my stomach. The drumming started again as soon as darkness descended, clearer now, louder. Closer. It was accompanied by a low, chanting sound, barely audible, like voices murmuring too far away to understand. My skin crawled. This wasn't the wind. This wasn't my imagination. Something was happening in the woods below. I grabbed the radio, my hands trembling slightly. John, this is 7. John, do you copy? Static. Just endless, empty static. I tried again, and again, frantically turning the dial, adjusting the antenna, but the radio remained stubbornly silent. The only sound was the relentless drumming and the faint chanting from below. I was cut off. Completely and utterly alone. Panic started to claw at my throat. I forced myself to breathe, to think rationally. Maybe it was just hikers, out in the woods at night, having some kind of bonfire party? But the drumming, the chanting, it didn't sound like any party I'd ever heard. And hikers wouldn't be this deep in the wilderness, especially not at night. This area was remote, intentionally so. It was fire lookout territory, not a tourist destination. I grabbed my flashlight, a heavy-duty mag light John had given me, and cautiously opened the trapdoor leading to the tower's catwalk that encircled the cabin. The wind ripped at me, icy and fierce, almost knocking me off my feet. I gripped the railing, heart hammering against my ribs, and slowly, carefully, edged my way around the walkway, shining the beam of the flashlight down into the forest. Darkness. Absolute, impenetrable darkness. The flashlight beam sliced through the night, illuminating only the closest trees, their branches skeletal and menacing in the stark light. I strained my ears, listening, searching. The drumming and chanting were clearer now, definitely coming from the south side of the tower, deeper in the woods. And then I saw it. Flickering lights, down amongst the trees, bobbing and weaving like fireflies, but too many, too organized. Torches. They were carrying torches. My breath caught in my throat. Torches? In the middle of the night? In this wilderness? Who were these people? Fear turned to a cold, creeping dread. This wasn't hikers. This wasn't a bonfire party. This was something else. Something wrong. I retreated back into the cabin, slamming the trapdoor shut and bolting it. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely work the latch. I leaned against the wooden door, listening, heart pounding, straining to hear over the wind. The drumming and chanting continued, growing louder, closer. The flickering lights were moving too, slowly, inexorably, up the mountain, towards the tower. They were coming here. Terror, raw and visceral, gripped me. I scrambled to the small, dusty window on the opposite side of the cabin, peering out into the darkness. Nothing. Just blackness and the howling wind. I was trapped. High up in this rickety tower, miles from civilization, with no radio contact, and a group of torch-bearing somethings, making their way up the mountain towards me. My mind raced, desperately trying to find a solution, an escape. But there was none. The tower was my fortress and my prison. I was supposed to be safe up here, watching for fires, not barricading myself against, what? I looked around the cabin, my eyes darting from object to object in a frantic search for anything that could help. A fire extinguisher, useless against torch-wielding maniacs. A first aid kit, bandages wouldn't stop them. A rusty old axe, maybe, just maybe. I grabbed the axe, its weight surprisingly comforting in my trembling hands. It was old, the handle worn smooth with time, the blade dull and pitted with rust, but it was something. Something to defend myself with. I stood by the trapdoor, axe clutched tightly, listening, waiting. The drumming and chanting were very close now, just below the tower. I could hear the crackle of torches, the rustling of undergrowth as they moved through the trees. They were surrounding the base of the mountain, their torches casting eerie, dancing shadows on the forest floor. Then, the chanting stopped. The drumming ceased. Silence descended, a thick, suffocating silence that was even more terrifying than the noise. The wind still howled, but it seemed muted, insignificant against the heavy stillness that had fallen over the woods. I held my breath, straining my ears, listening for any sound, any movement. Nothing. Just silence. A silence that felt expectant. Like the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting. And then, a new sound. A scraping sound, coming from below the tower, from the base of the wooden pilings that supported the structure. Scraping, scratching, like claws on wood. Animal claws? But too rhythmic, too deliberate. The scraping grew louder, more insistent. It was coming from directly beneath me, just below the floorboards. They were under the tower. My blood turned to ice. They weren't just surrounding the mountain. They were climbing. They were coming up the tower. Terror surged through me, a tidal wave of fear that threatened to drown me. I backed away from the trapdoor, stumbling blindly across the small cabin, bumping into the table, knocking over my water bottle. I had to get out. I had to escape. But where could I go? There was nowhere to run. I was trapped. The scraping continued, now joined by creaking sounds, the groans of the old wood protesting under the weight of whatever was climbing it. The tower began to sway, gently at first, then more violently, rocking back and forth in the wind, or not the wind. Something was shaking the tower. Something was climbing it. I scrambled to the window again, peering frantically into the darkness. And then I saw them. Faces. Pale, gaunt faces, contorted in grotesque masks, staring up at the tower, illuminated by the flickering glow of the torches they carried. They were climbing the pilings, slow and deliberate, their masked faces expressionless, their eyes black pits in the torchlight. They were dressed in dark robes, hooded and shapeless, obscuring their bodies, making them look like shadows come to life. Cultists. The word flashed into my mind, unbidden, terrifyingly real. Unholy cultists. The drumming, the chanting, the torches, the masks, it all clicked into place, a horrifying, sickening realization. I was trapped, not just by the wilderness, but by something far more sinister. The scraping was closer now, right beneath the cabin floor. I could hear their breathing, ragged and uneven, their low murmuring voices, too close to understand, too close for comfort. The tower swayed violently, the wooden structure groaning and protesting under their assault. They were going to break in. They were going to reach me. Desperation clawed at me, overriding the terror, pushing me to action. I had to do something. Anything. I couldn't just stand here and wait for them to break in and what? What did they want? Sacrifice? Ritual? My mind recoiled from the possibilities. I looked around the cabin again, my eyes landing on the radio. It was useless, dead, silent. But, maybe if I could get outside, maybe if I could climb to the very top of the tower, to the highest point, maybe the signal would be stronger there. Maybe, just maybe, I could get a signal. Maybe I could reach John. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble, but it was the only plan I had. I gripped the axe tighter, took a deep breath, and made for the trapdoor. The scraping was directly beneath it now. I could feel vibrations through the floorboards, hear the heavy breathing just inches below my feet. They were right there. I hesitated for a moment, fear paralyzing me, my hand hovering over the bolt. But the thought of those masked faces, those black eyes, climbing into the cabin, propelled me forward. I threw the bolt, yanked open the trapdoor, and scrambled out onto the catwalk, the wind tearing at me like a physical force. The night air was freezing, biting at my exposed skin, but I barely noticed. My eyes were fixed on the base of the tower, on the figures climbing up the wooden pilings. They were closer now, much closer, their masked faces just below the level of the catwalk. I didn't hesitate. I turned and started climbing the ladder that led to the top of the tower, the open-air observation platform high above the cabin. The wind howled in my ears, the ladder swayed precariously, and the masked figures were climbing closer, but I didn't look back. I kept climbing, hand over hand, rung by rung, driven by adrenaline and terror. The ladder seemed to stretch on forever, each rung a tiny victory against the encroaching darkness and the terrifying figures below. The tower swayed violently, making the climb even more treacherous, but I kept going, fueled by a desperate hope, a primal urge to survive. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I reached the top platform. It was small, exposed, surrounded by a flimsy railing that rattled in the wind. The view was breathtaking, even in the darkness, a vast panorama of mountains and forests stretching out to the horizon. But I had no time for scenery. I pulled the radio from my backpack, my fingers numb with cold, and frantically turned it on, adjusting the dial, praying for a signal, any signal. Static. Just endless, mocking static. My heart sank. It wasn't going to work. I was too high, too exposed, the signal too weak. But I couldn't give up. Not yet. I raised the antenna as high as I could, holding it aloft like a pathetic offering to the uncaring wind. John. John, this is 7. Do you copy? Please, John, answer me. My voice was hoarse, desperate, lost in the howling wind. More static. Then, a faint crackle, a flicker of something amidst the emptiness. I held my breath, listening, straining my ears. Another crackle, clearer this time, followed by a voice. Faint, garbled, almost unintelligible, but a voice. 7, do you copy? 7, it was John. His voice, distorted and weak, but it was him. He was there. He could hear me. John. John, it's me, Rick. 7. I hear you. Can you hear me? I shouted into the radio, my voice cracking with emotion, tears stinging my eyes. The voice faded again, swallowed by static. Then, it returned, slightly clearer this time. 7, loud and clear, what's happening? His voice was still weak, but I could understand him now. John, they're here. There's a cult. They're in the woods, they're climbing the tower. They're going to, my voice broke, choked with fear. John, I need help. Please, you have to help me. Silence. Just static. Had I lost him again? Had the signal faded? Panic surged through me, threatening to overwhelm me. John? John, are you there? Answer me. Then, his voice, stronger this time, more urgent. Cult, tower, understood, 7. Stay calm. Do not engage. Repeat, do not engage. I am calling for backup. Help is on the way. ETA, uncertain. Hold tight, 7. Hold tight. Backup? How long? John, they're climbing the tower. They'll be here any minute. My voice was frantic, pleading. Hold tight, 7. That's all you can do. Hold tight and pray. His voice faded again, swallowed by static. Over and out. Silence. The radio went dead. I stared at the speaker, numb with disbelief. Backup. Help was coming. But how long would it take? And could I survive until then? I looked down at the tower cabin, at the catwalk below. The masked figures were on the catwalk now, their torches bobbing in the darkness, their black eyes staring up at me. They had reached the top of the tower. They were coming for me. I gripped the axe tighter, my knuckles white, my heart pounding in my chest. Hold tight. John's words echoed in my mind. Hold tight and pray. Pray. That's what I could do. Pray and fight. If they came for me, I would fight. I wouldn't go down without a fight. The masked figures started climbing the final ladder, the ladder to the top platform. They were slow, deliberate, their movements ritualistic, almost ceremonial. They weren't rushing. They were savoring this. They were enjoying the hunt. I stood at the edge of the platform, axe raised, my body trembling with fear and adrenaline, waiting for them. The wind howled around me, a mournful dirge, and the masked figures climbed closer, their torches casting flickering shadows on their gaunt faces, their black eyes fixed on me. They reached the top of the ladder, one by one, stepping onto the platform, surrounding me, cutting off my escape. There were 5 of them, tall, cloaked figures, their masks grotesque and terrifying. They moved slowly, deliberately, forming a circle around me, their torches held aloft, casting eerie light on their faces. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Their silence was more terrifying than any words. Their presence was a suffocating blanket of dread, of unholy intent. One of them stepped forward, the tallest of the group, his mask particularly grotesque, resembling a skull with twisted horns. He raised his hand, a long, bony hand, and pointed at me. And then, he spoke. His voice was low, guttural, rasping, like stones grinding together, but I understood the words. They were English, but twisted, archaic, imbued with a dark, unsettling power. The offering is ready. Offering. That was me. I was the offering. For what? For whom? I didn't want to know. Fear gave way to a surge of anger, of defiance. I wasn't going to be an offering. I wasn't going to let them take me. I raised the axe, brandishing it at them, my voice trembling but firm. Get back. Stay away from me. They didn't move. They just stared at me, their black eyes unwavering, their masks expressionless. The tall figure spoke again, his guttural voice echoing in the wind. Resistance is futile. Futile? Maybe. But I wasn't going down without a fight. I charged at them, axe swinging, a primal scream tearing from my throat, a desperate cry of defiance against the encroaching darkness. The fight was short, brutal, terrifying. They were stronger than they looked, their movements fast, almost inhuman. My axe swung wildly, connecting with wood, with cloth, but barely slowing them down. They swarmed me, their torches flickering dangerously close, the heat searing my skin. I fought with everything I had, driven by adrenaline and fear, but it wasn't enough. They were too many, too strong, something else. Something unnatural. I stumbled, tripped, fell to my knees on the wooden platform, the axe slipping from my grasp, clattering to the floor. They closed in, surrounding me, their masked faces looming over me, their torches burning like demonic eyes in the darkness. The tall figure stepped forward again, reaching down, his bony hand grasping my arm, his grip like iron. He pulled me to my feet, his touch cold, clammy, sending shivers of revulsion through my body. He dragged me to the edge of the platform, the edge overlooking the vast, dark abyss of the forest below. The wind howled, mocking my helplessness, my impending doom. "The forest claims its due," the tall figure rasped, his voice filled with a chilling satisfaction. He pushed. I screamed, a long, echoing scream that was swallowed by the wind, by the darkness, by the vast indifference of the wilderness. I fell, tumbling through the air, the wind rushing past my ears, the ground rushing up to meet me. Darkness. Then, pain. Agony. Every bone in my body screaming in protest. I lay broken, twisted, amidst the cold, damp undergrowth at the base of the tower, the wooden structure looming above me like a skeletal finger pointing accusingly at the sky. I could hear them, faintly, from above. Chanting. The same low, rhythmic chanting I had heard earlier, but now louder, clearer, triumphant. They were chanting my death, celebrating my sacrifice. My vision blurred, darkness closing in, cold seeping into my bones. Cold. That was the first sensation that truly cut through the fog of pain. Not just the chill of the damp earth pressing against my broken body, but a deep, penetrating cold that seeped into my marrow, colder than any North American night I had ever known. It felt like the cold of space, the void between stars, somehow pressed up against my skin. My vision remained stubbornly blurred, fractured into shimmering shards of darkness and dim, indistinct light. Pain, yes, that was still there, a roaring, white-hot furnace consuming every nerve ending. But the cold was different. The pain felt like a warning, a scream from my body. The cold felt like something else entirely, something predatory. The chanting was still there, a low, guttural thrumming that vibrated in the earth beneath me, in my very bones. It wasn't quite celebrating anymore. There was a new tone now, an undercurrent of impatience. It was harder to decipher in my fractured state, like trying to understand a conversation through a thick wall. My mind, blessedly, was starting to flicker back to life, pulled from the brink by the sheer, brutal assault on my senses. Death, it seemed, was a journey, not a switch. And I was, apparently, stubbornly refusing to take the final step. Good. Spite, even in this state, was a powerful motivator. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, my vision started to coalesce. The blurry shards began to knit themselves back together, resolving into shapes. Above me, the tower. Vastly taller now, looming against the inky sky like a skeletal giant. Its wooden frame, once familiar and reassuring, now seemed menacing, dark, almost organic, as if it had grown out of the very earth to trap me here. Around me, the forest. Not the familiar, comforting forest I had grown to know over the past few months. This was different. The trees, silhouetted against the faint starlight filtering through the dense canopy, seemed to writhe and twist into unnatural shapes. Their branches, like gnarled fingers, reached down towards me, clawing, grasping. The air itself felt heavy, thick with an unseen presence. I tried to move. A mistake. A searing lance of agony shot through my left leg, radiating outwards in sickening waves. My arm felt no better. I lay there, panting, my breath ragged in the cold night air, the pain a pulsing reminder of my shattered state. But I was alive. At least, I seemed to be. And as long as breath filled my lungs, as long as a flicker of consciousness remained, I would fight. Even against, whatever they were. Who were they? The question echoed dully in my throbbing head. My job. Fire lookout. That's what I was supposed to be doing. High above the tree lean, watching for the first tendrils of smoke, the first signs of wildfire in this vast, tinder-dry wilderness. John, my boss, had been clear. Keep your eyes peeled, Rick. This is a crucial summer. Dry as bone. One spark and this whole damn forest could go up. John. A gruff, no-nonsense man, smelling eternally of stale coffee and sawdust. He'd seemed happy enough to give me this job, this solitude, this escape. I hadn't told him about the escape part, not explicitly. But I think he knew. People like John, they see more than they let on. Escape from what? The city. The noise. The endless, grinding routine. And, her. Sarah. But thinking about her was another kind of pain, a dull ache in my chest that was almost worse than the physical agony. Better to focus on the pain I could feel, the pain that screamed of survival. I'd been up in the tower for 3 months. Routine. Sunrise, sunset, scan the horizon, radio in weather reports, check equipment, repeat. Days blurred into weeks, weeks into months. The quiet had been healing, at first. The vastness of the forest, the endless sky, had been a balm to my frayed nerves. Then, the chanting had started. It had been subtle at first, barely audible, like the wind sighing through distant pines. I'd dismissed it, naturally. Sounds carry strangely in the mountains, play tricks on your ears. But it had grown. Louder. More insistent. More structured. It wasn't just the wind. It was a sound with purpose, with intent. I'd started to feel uneasy. The forest, which had once felt comforting, began to feel oppressive, watchful. The shadows seemed deeper, the nights darker. I started seeing things out of the corner of my eye, fleeting movements in the periphery of my vision. Just my imagination, I'd told myself. Loneliness playing tricks on my mind. But the chanting, it was real. Undeniably real. And it was getting closer. The last few days had been a descent into mounting paranoia. The chanting had become almost constant, a low, relentless hum that seemed to vibrate in the air itself. I'd tried to rationalize it. Animals? Some sort of strange wildlife mating ritual? But it sounded intelligent. Too structured, too deliberate to be animalistic. Then, last night. They had come. I hadn't seen them clearly at first. Just movement in the trees, shadows shifting and coalescing in the darkness. But there were too many shadows, too much movement for it to be natural. And then, the chanting had become deafening, rising in volume and intensity, vibrating the wooden planks of the tower itself. Panic had seized me. Stupidly, irrationally, I had climbed higher, thinking to escape them by height, by distance. As if altitude could protect me from whatever these things were. They had followed. Moving with impossible speed through the trees, their chanting growing louder, closer, more menacing. And then, they were at the base of the tower. I could see them now, dimly, through the gaps in the wooden floorboards. Shapes. Dark, indistinct shapes moving in the shadows below. Not human. Not quite. Too tall, too slender, moving with a fluidity that was unsettling. And their voices, chanting not in any language I knew, but in something guttural, primal, ancient. A language of the earth itself. A language that resonated with a deep, unsettling dread within my own soul. They had started to climb. I had scrambled higher, fear lending me a desperate, adrenaline-fueled strength. Up the narrow wooden stairs, rung by rung, further and further into the night. They were below me, climbing with unnatural speed, their chanting echoing up the tower, filling the cramped space with their alien sound. I had reached the observation platform, the highest point of the tower. Thinking, stupidly, that I could somehow defend myself here. With what? A rusty fire extinguisher? A pair of binoculars? They had emerged onto the platform, surrounding me. And in the flickering starlight, I had seen them. Not human. But humanoid, in a twisted, grotesque way. Tall, gaunt figures, their limbs too long, their bodies too thin. Their skin was a pale, sickly gray, stretched taut over sharp bones. And their faces. Oh God, their faces. Hollow eye sockets, empty of eyes, yet somehow seeing, perceiving. Wide, lipless mouths filled with rows of needle-sharp teeth. And on their foreheads, carved deep into the pale flesh, symbols. Strange, angular symbols that seemed to writhe and shift in my vision, radiating an aura of ancient evil. They hadn't spoken in any human language. They hadn't needed to. Their intent was clear, radiating from them like a palpable wave of malevolence. They wanted me. They had come for me. And in that moment of pure, unadulterated terror, I had made the worst decision of my life. I had turned to run. Run where? Nowhere to run. Trapped on a tiny platform, surrounded by creatures from a nightmare. But instinct had taken over, pure, blind panic overriding reason. I had stumbled backwards, towards the edge of the platform, scrambling to find an escape, any escape. And then I had stepped into empty air. The fall had been mercifully swift. A roaring wind in my ears, a sickening lurch in my stomach, and then, darkness, pain, and the cold earth rising up to meet me. And now, here I lay, broken and bleeding, at the base of the tower, listening to their chanting as they continued their ritual, or whatever it was. Ritual. Sacrifice. The words resonated, chillingly. They had been chanting my death, celebrating my sacrifice. But sacrifice to whom? To what? The chanting shifted again, becoming louder, more insistent. It felt closer now, as if they were descending the tower. Coming for me. To finish the job? To collect their sacrifice? Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through the fog of pain. I had to move. Staying here, lying broken and helpless, was suicide. Even if every movement was agony, even if escape was impossible, I had to try. I had to fight. Gritting my teeth against the searing pain, I pushed myself up onto my elbows. My left leg screamed in protest, a white-hot javelin of pain driving through my thigh. My left arm felt numb, useless. But my right arm, it was still functional. And my right leg, maybe, just maybe, I could put some weight on it. Slowly, painstakingly, I began to crawl. Dragging my broken body across the cold, damp earth, inch by agonizing inch. Away from the tower. Away from them. Towards, where? I didn't know. Into the darkness, into the forest, into the unknown. Each movement was a fresh wave of pain, each breath a ragged gasp. The chanting grew louder, closer. I could hear them moving in the trees above, branches snapping, leaves rustling, a chorus of unnatural movement that surrounded me, closing in. I had to get further away. Deeper into the forest. Maybe, just maybe, if I could put enough distance between myself and the tower, between myself and them, maybe I could have a chance. A slim chance, a desperate chance, but a chance nonetheless. I crawled on, driven by a primal instinct to survive, to escape. The cold earth scraped against my skin, the dampness seeped into my clothes, chilling me to the bone. The pain was a constant, roaring presence, threatening to overwhelm me, to drag me back down into the darkness. But I kept crawling. One agonizing inch at a time. The chanting was still close, but it seemed, less focused now. More dispersed. Maybe I was getting further away. Or maybe it was just wishful thinking, a desperate attempt to cling to hope in the face of overwhelming despair. Suddenly, I tripped. My good leg caught on something, a root, a rock, I didn't know. I stumbled, fell forward, landing heavily on my injured arm. A scream tore from my lips, involuntary, animalistic. Darkness swam at the edges of my vision. I lay there for a moment, gasping for breath, waves of pain washing over me. The chanting seemed to grow louder again, focused, directed. They knew where I was. They were closing in. I struggled to push myself up again, but my arm wouldn't support me. My leg was screaming, my head was spinning. I was losing strength, losing consciousness. The cold was seeping deeper, numbing my senses, dragging me down. Despair threatened to engulf me, to drown me in its icy depths. What was the point? Escape was impossible. They were too fast, too strong, too otherworldly. I was broken, helpless, alone in the heart of a dark, malevolent forest. But then, something shifted. Not in the chanting, not in the forest around me, but within me. A spark of defiance, a flicker of anger, ignited within the ashes of despair. Damn them. Damn them all. They wanted my sacrifice. They wanted my death. They would have to earn it. They would not have it easily. Clenching my teeth, ignoring the screaming protests of my body, I rolled over onto my back. Staring up at the inky sky, I took a deep, ragged breath. The air was cold, sharp, invigorating. And for the first time since I had fallen from the tower, I felt a surge of something other than fear. Something akin to resolve. If I was going to die here, in this dark and godforsaken place, would die fighting. I would not surrender. I would not become their willing sacrifice. I scanned my surroundings, my blurred vision slowly adjusting to the darkness. Around me, the forest floor was littered with debris, fallen branches, rocks, clumps of moss. Anything I could use? Anything to defend myself? My hand brushed against something hard, cold, metallic. My fingers closed around it, fumbling in the darkness. Metal. Heavy. Solid. My fire axe. The fire axe. I had dropped it when I had fallen. Miraculously, it had landed within reach. Hope, however fragile, flickered within me again. With my good arm, I dragged the axe closer, hefting it in my hand. It was heavy, unwieldy, especially in my weakened state. But it was a weapon. A weapon against whatever was coming for me. The chanting was very close now, just beyond the trees. I could hear their movements, the snapping of branches, the rustling of leaves, the low, guttural whispers that were not words, but something older, something darker. They were coming. I gripped the axe tightly, my knuckles white against the cold metal. My breath came in ragged gasps, adrenaline coursing through my veins, numbing the pain, sharpening my senses. Fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach, but beneath it, something else was growing. Something fierce. Something defiant. I would not go quietly. I would not be a sacrifice. I would fight. With every last ounce of strength I possessed. For my life. For my sanity. For something. Something I couldn't quite name, but something that burned within me, refusing to be extinguished. The trees rustled, parted. They were here. Emerging from the darkness, they came. Taller than I remembered, their gaunt figures more grotesque in the closer light. Their pale skin seemed to glow faintly in the darkness, their hollow eye sockets like dark pits, yet somehow filled with a malevolent light. The symbols on their foreheads pulsed with an inner luminescence. They moved slowly, deliberately, their movements fluid and unnatural, like shadows come to life. Their chanting intensified, a deafening chorus of guttural sounds that seemed to claw at my sanity. There were 3 of them. 3 of those things. Surrounding me, closing in. Their lipless mouths opened, revealing rows of needle-sharp teeth. A low, hissing sound emanated from them, like the rustling of dry leaves in a cold wind. Fear threatened to paralyze me again, to turn me to stone. But the defiance within me burned hotter, stronger. I would not yield. With a guttural roar that echoed through the silent forest, I lunged forward, swinging the axe with all my remaining strength. The weight of the axe pulled at my injured arm, pain searing through me, but I ignored it. Focused only on the closest figure, its pale, gaunt face looming before me. The axe connected with a sickening thud. Not the solid, meaty thud of wood, but something, softer, more yielding. Like striking flesh, but not quite. A strange, viscous resistance. The figure recoiled, hissing, its body contorting in an unnatural way. The chanting faltered, breaking into jagged, discordant sounds. A dark, viscous fluid welled up from the wound, dripping onto the forest floor, steaming faintly in the cold air. It was hurt. Vulnerable. They were not invincible. Hope flared again, brighter this time, fueled by adrenaline and desperation. I swung the axe again, aiming for the same spot, for the pale, exposed flesh of its shoulder. The axe struck home again, with another sickening thud, eliciting another hiss of pain from the creature. The other two figures reacted, moving faster now, their chanting becoming more frantic, more aggressive. One of them lunged at me, its long, gaunt arm reaching out, claws extended. I ducked, narrowly avoiding its grasp, the claws raking across my shoulder, tearing through my shirt, drawing blood. Pain exploded in my shoulder, but I ignored it, focusing on the figure I had wounded. It was staggering back, its movements faltering, the dark fluid continuing to flow from its wounds. I pressed my advantage, swinging the axe again and again, driven by a frenzy of desperate energy. Each blow connected with a sickening thud, each strike eliciting a hiss of pain from the creature. The other two figures attacked, flanking me, their movements fast, relentless. I was outmatched, outmaneuvered, surrounded. But I would not yield. I would not surrender. I would fight until my last breath. One of the figures grabbed my injured arm, its grip like iron, squeezing the broken bones, sending waves of agony through my body. I screamed, dropping the axe, my hand going numb, useless. The other figure lunged, its gaunt face inches from mine, its hollow eye sockets staring into my soul. Its lipless mouth opened, revealing rows of needle-sharp teeth. The hissing sound grew louder, closer, filling my ears, drowning out all other sounds. I closed my eyes, bracing for the end. For the pain, for the darkness, for the final, inevitable sacrifice. But then, something happened. A sound. Not the hissing, not the chanting, but a different sound. A high-pitched, piercing shriek, echoing through the forest, cutting through the night. A sound of agony? Of terror? The grip on my arm loosened. The hissing stopped. The chanting faltered, died away completely. I opened my eyes, blinking in the dim light. The figures were still there, but they were different. They were frozen, rigid, their gaunt bodies contorted in unnatural positions. The symbols on their foreheads flickered, dimmed, and then went dark. The piercing shriek echoed again, closer this time, vibrating in the air itself. And then, something else. A light. A bright, white light, piercing through the darkness, illuminating the forest, banishing the shadows. The light grew stronger, brighter, bathing the forest in an ethereal glow. The frozen figures began to crumble. Their pale skin turned to ash, their gaunt bodies dissolving into dust, carried away by the wind. The symbols on their foreheads faded completely, leaving behind nothing but empty, ashen spaces. In seconds, they were gone. Vanished. As if they had never been. Leaving behind only silence, and the lingering scent of ozone. And something else, something acrid, metallic, like burnt bone. The white light pulsed, then receded, fading back into the night. The forest remained silent, still, holding its breath. The chanting was gone. The hissing was gone. The figures were gone. Only I remained. Broken, bleeding, exhausted, but alive. And in the silence, in the aftermath of terror, I heard another sound. A familiar sound. The crackle of static. A voice, faint and distorted, but undeniably human. Rick? Rick, do you read? This is John, do you read me? Tower, do you copy? John. My boss. On the radio. Slowly, numbly, I reached for the radio, still clipped to my belt. My fingers fumbled with the controls, my hand shaking violently. I managed to press the transmit button, my voice a hoarse whisper, barely audible. John. This is Rick. I read you. Silence for a moment, then a gasp, a rush of static, and then John's voice, clear and strong, cutting through the silence. Rick. Thank God. We thought you were gone. What the hell happened up there? We heard screaming, chanting. What was that? What's going on? What was going on? How could I explain it? How could I describe the horrors I had witnessed, the creatures I had fought, the ancient evil that had stalked me in the darkness? Would he believe me? Would anyone believe me? I took a deep breath, the cold air filling my lungs, bracing myself for the impossible task of explaining the unexplainable. The words came slowly, haltingly, at first, then faster, more urgently, as the adrenaline began to wear off, and the cold, the pain, the exhaustion, began to creep back in. John, you wouldn't believe me if I told you, I began, my voice trembling, echoing in the silent, watchful forest. But, they came. They came for me. And I think I killed them.